March 21, 1987. The funeral was over. 300 people had paid their respects. Dean Martin sat alone in the front row, his son's casket 15 feet away. He hadn't moved in 3 hours. Then Clint Eastwood sat down next to him. He said nothing, just sat. 5 minutes of silence. Dean turned to Clint. His face was dry, no tears, and he said something about a plane, about fear, about the day his son asked him to fly. What Dean said next made Clint Eastwood, a man who rarely shows emotion, break down crying. It revealed the secret Dean had been carrying for 13 years. March 21, 1987. Pierce Brothers Westwood Village Memorial Park in Los Angeles. The sky was gray, not raining, just gray, like the weather knew what had happened. Captain Dean Paul Martin Jr. was dead, 35 years old. An F-4 Phantom II fighter jet had crashed during an Air National Guard training exercise. The wreckage was found in the San Bernardino Mountains. There wasn't much left to bury. Dean Martin's oldest son, the boy he'd flown with in that tiny Cessna 13 years ago, the pilot who'd made his terrified father smile for 45 minutes straight. Gone. The funeral was massive. 300 people. Frank Sinatra was there, Sammy Davis Jr., Bob Newhart, Shirley MacLaine, every major name in Hollywood. They came because Dino Jr. was loved. They came because Dean Martin was Hollywood royalty. They came to pay respects. Dean Martin sat in the front pew, black suit, black tie. His face was expressionless, not crying, not moving, just staring at the flag-draped casket 15 feet in front of him. His son in a box. The service lasted 2 hours. Prayers, eulogies, military honors. Dino Jr.'s Air Force colleagues spoke about his service, his skill, his dedication. Friends talked about his humor, his kindness, his passion for flying. Dean Martin didn't speak, couldn't speak, didn't cry, couldn't cry. Just sat there frozen. People noticed, whispered about it. He's in shock. Grief does strange things, give him time. But Dean wasn't in shock. He was somewhere else. Somewhere in 1974, in a tiny Cessna, gripping the armrest, smiling at his son, lying about being okay. The service ended. The organist played. People stood and filed out slowly, respectful, sad. They approached Dean, touched his shoulder, said things he didn't hear. "I'm so sorry. He was a wonderful young man. If you need anything." Dean nodded automatically, not really present. Frank bent down and whispered something. Dean nodded again. Frank squeezed his shoulder and left. One by one, they left until the chapel was nearly empty. Just Dean, his son's casket, and the terrible silence. Dean didn't move, couldn't move. His hands gripped the pew in front of him, knuckles white. He'd been sitting there for 3 hours. Hadn't eaten, hadn't drunk water, hadn't gone to the bathroom. Just sat staring. A funeral director approached gently. "Mr. Martin, we need to." Dean didn't respond. The director looked at Dean's daughter, Deanna. She shook her head. "Give him a few more minutes." They left him alone. The chapel was empty now. Just Dean, the casket, and gray light coming through stained glass windows. Then footsteps, slow, steady, coming down the aisle. Clint Eastwood. He'd been at the funeral in the back. Hadn't approached Dean during the receiving line, just observed, respectful, quiet. Now he walked back in alone, down the center aisle. His footsteps echoed in the empty chapel. Dean didn't look up, didn't acknowledge him, just kept staring at the casket. Clint reached the front pew, didn't say anything. "No, I'm sorry for your loss. No, he was a good man. No, if you need anything." He just sat down next to Dean. Left 2 feet of space between them. And sat. Silence. Not uncomfortable silence, not awkward silence, just silence. 1 minute passed. Dean's breathing was shallow. His hands still gripped the pew. His eyes stayed locked on the casket. Clint sat with his hands folded, looking straight ahead. Not at Dean, not at the casket, just ahead. 2 minutes. Outside, cars were starting, people were leaving, the funeral was over, life was continuing. But in this chapel, time had stopped. 3 minutes. Dean's grip on the pew loosened slightly. His breathing steadied. The presence of another person, someone not trying to comfort him, not trying to say the right thing, just being there, was somehow more helpful than all 300 condolences combined. 4 minutes. Clint didn't move, didn't speak, just sat. This was what Dean needed. Not words, not sympathy, just someone willing to sit in the grief with him, not trying to fix it, not trying to make it better, just acknowledging it. 5 minutes. Then Dean Martin spoke. The first words in 3 hours. His voice was rough, unused, barely above a whisper. 1974. Clint didn't respond, didn't look at him, just listened. Dino got his pilot's license. May 1974. He was 22 years old. Dean's voice was steady. No emotion, just facts, like he was reading a report. He asked me to be his first passenger. Clint remained still. And Dean Martin started telling a story about a plane, about fear, about the last time he'd felt his son was truly proud of him. I was terrified of flying, Dean said, voice flat, emotionless. Everyone knew. It wasn't a secret. I hated small planes, especially hated them. Clint listened. My doctor told me not to do it, said my heart couldn't take it. Small plane, that altitude, the stress. He said it could trigger a heart attack. Dean's hands released the pew and fell into his lap. But Dino asked me, he was so excited. He'd worked so hard for that license, and he wanted me to be his first passenger, not Frank, not Sammy, me, his father. For the first time, emotion crept into Dean's voice, small, barely noticeable. So I said yes. I got on that plane, a tiny Cessna, 4 seats, single engine, it looked like a toy. Dean's breath caught, then continued. The moment the engine started, I knew I made a mistake. My heart was racing. My hands were shaking. I was gripping the armrest so hard I left marks in the leather. A pause. We took off, and for 45 minutes I was the most terrified I've ever been in my life. I thought I was going to die. I thought my heart was going to explode. I thought the plane was going to fall out of the sky. Dean turned to look at Clint for the first time. His face was still dry, but his eyes were hollow. But Dino kept looking back at me, checking on me, making sure I was okay. And every single time he looked back, I smiled. I gave him a thumbs up. I said, "You're doing great, son. This is fantastic." Dean's voice cracked slightly. I lied. For 45 minutes straight, I lied to my son, because I didn't want him to know I was terrified. I didn't want to ruin his moment. I wanted him to believe his father was proud and fearless. A long pause. The moment we landed. I got out of the plane and threw up right there on the tarmac. Dino was horrified. He thought he'd done something wrong. He apologized over and over. Dean's hands began to tremble. And I pulled him into a hug, and I told him it was the best flight of my life. I told him he was incredible. I told him I was so proud. The trembling got worse. He believed me. He never knew the truth. For 13 years, he thought his father had enjoyed that flight. He thought I was proud and unafraid. Dean's voice finally broke. And now he's dead in a plane. The thing I feared most, the thing I was terrified of, it took my son. The first tear fell, just one. He died thinking I was proud of him, but he never knew how scared I was. He never knew the truth. I lied to him, and now I can never tell him. Dean put his face in his hands. He died believing I was brave, but I was just a coward who smiled. And Dean Martin, the man who never cried in public, who made a career out of effortless cool, broke down. Clint Eastwood sat silent, watching Dean Martin cry for the first time in 3 hours. A minute passed. Dean's shoulders shook. No sound, just silent tears, years of them stored up, released. Then Clint spoke. His voice was low, measured. He knew. Dean's crying slowed. He looked up, confused. What? He knew, Clint repeated. Dino Jr. knew you were terrified. Dean shook his head. No, I hid it. I smiled every time. He was a pilot, Clint said gently but firmly. A trained military pilot. He knew what fear looks like. He knew what white knuckles mean. He knew what forced smiles are. Dean stared at him. Your son wasn't naive, Clint continued. He'd flown with scared passengers before. He knew exactly what terror looks like in a passenger's eyes. A pause. He knew you were terrified, and he knew you got on the plane anyway. Dean's breath caught. That's why it mattered, Clint said. Not because you weren't scared, because you were scared and you did it anyway. Clint turned to face him. You think you lied to him. You think you hid your fear. But Dean, he saw the truth. He saw his father, genuinely terrified, get on a plane because his son asked him to. He didn't think you were fearless. He knew you were terrified, and that's what made it meaningful. Fearless people don't sacrifice anything, but you did. You sacrificed your safety, your comfort, your pride, for him. A long silence. You didn't lie to him, Clint said. You loved him and he knew it. Dean Martin stared at Clint Eastwood, and something in those words broke through the grief. Not fixing it, not healing it, just making it bearable. You think so? Dean asked softly. I know so, Clint said. Because if you weren't afraid, it wouldn't have mattered. It would have just been another day with Dad. But knowing you were terrified and seeing you smile anyway, that showed him love. Clint put his hand on Dean's shoulder. He knew Dean, and he loved you for it. Dean Martin leaned into that hand and cried, really cried, the kind that comes from release, from permission. Clint stayed, didn't move, just held his shoulder as long as Dean needed. Dean Martin never performed again after March 21st, 1987. His manager tried, his friends tried, Frank Sinatra begged him to come back. The stage will help, Frank said. The music will heal you. Dean refused. I'm done. And he was. For 8 years, Dean Martin existed. He didn't live, he existed. He stayed in his house, watched TV, drank not the fun drinking, the slow kind. His family watched him fade, couldn't stop it. He died with Dino Jr., his daughter Deanna said later. The funeral was just his body catching up to his heart. On Christmas Day, 1995, Dean Martin died. Acute respiratory failure, 78 years old. 8 years, 9 months, and 4 days after his son. His funeral was smaller, quieter. Hollywood came again, but this time there was less spectacle, more sadness. This wasn't a tragic death. It was expected. Clint Eastwood was there. He sat in the back, didn't approach the family. After the service, a reporter stopped him. Mr. Eastwood, you attended both funerals. Were you close to the Martin family? Clint paused. I wasn't close, he said, but I respected Dean. He was a good father, the reporter pressed. What makes you say that? Clint looked toward the casket. Because he loved his son more than he loved his own life, he said. And when his son died, he chose to follow him. Clint walked away. He didn't explain the conversation. Some things stay between two men sitting in silence. Until 2015. 20 years after Dean's death, Clint Eastwood finally told the story. He gets remembered as the drunk guy with a martini, Clint said. But that's not who he was. Dean Martin was a father who got on a plane he was terrified of because his son asked him to. And when that son died in a plane, it destroyed him. He thought he lied to his son. He carried that guilt until it killed him. Clint looked at the camera. But here's the truth. Dino Jr. knew his father was terrified, and he knew he got on that plane anyway. That's what made it meaningful. Dean didn't lie, he loved. And sometimes love looks like smiling through terror. Sometimes love looks like getting on the plane. Dean Martin wasn't a coward, he was a father. And when his son died, he died too. Just took 8 years for his body to catch up. When asked if Dean was at peace, Clint didn't hesitate. I think he's with his son, and that's all he ever wanted. This is the story of a father who flew because his son asked, and a father who stopped living because his son couldn't. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is get on the plane. Sometimes the hardest thing is to keep living. Dean Martin did both. And when he couldn't do the second anymore, he let go. He fought for 8 years. Then he followed. Because that's what fathers do. And finally, he flew again. This time without fear. Because his son was waiting.